Good evening, everyone. It's great to see so many of you joining us. We'll just let a couple of minutes for you to all connect through and stuff, but it's great to see so many of you from all around the world as usual. So that's always great to see on a particularly chilly evening, certainly here. Anyway, well, welcome to the Society for Church Archaeology again. Hello. Just while we're waiting for you all to connect in, just a couple of reminders. We've got a great talk lined up tonight, so I'm sure you're going to have all sorts of questions. Rainy New Hampshire, I have no sympathy. So if you have a question, do pop it into the chat box. And Rob will put the questions to our speaker at the end. Just a reminder that these are obviously free lectures provided by the Society, but we do urge you to join us so we can continue to provide them. It's only with your support that we're able to put these things on. We'll also be having a conference in the summer, and I hope by January's evening talk I'll be able to give you some details about that. It's in the planning at the moment, and we have a potentially interesting and exciting location lined up, but I'll give you some more details about that next month. I think people are all joined in at the moment, Rob, aren't they? Is there anyone in the waiting room?
Yeah, no, we can probably crack on.
Fantastic. I will just give you a slight heads up with Fife. Bitterly cold. Is it ever not bitterly cold in Fife? Anyway, don't get me distracted in the chat box. Sorry. And insulting half the audience. Just a little heads up tonight is our speaker does have a little bit of a lag on her internet, which hopefully the router gremlins will pedal faster and it'll be all okay. But our apologies if there's any slight stutter at any point. But that aside, let me welcome our speaker tonight, who is Rachel Sycamore. Rachel graduated recently from a Master's by Research from the University of Worcester, and she is a professional furniture restorer and conservator. So you can see where her interests have come from and how she's segueing into tonight's topic. So she's going to be talking to us tonight about church chests, medieval society and medieval society. So without any further ado, I will hand over to Rachel and she will tell us all about it.
Thank you, Hugh. Hello, everybody, and welcome to my talk about church chests. So I'm going to share my screen. So hopefully you can all see my title page now.
Yeah, that looks good.
Great. I'm just going to slide all the little pictures away so that I can read what I've got here. That's it. Okay, yes, thank you everyone for attending on this bitter night. And I'm going to talk to you about church chests. So thank you to the Society for Church Archaeology for inviting me to talk to you today. Firstly, I'd like to introduce myself, although I've been introduced a little bit. So I've been making and restoring furniture since 1995, and I now specialise in the conservation of church chests. I do other things as well. I restore people's furniture in their homes, but my speciality is church chests since I did my master's degree. So 4 years ago, I became aware that there was very little research into church chests, or their chronology, their construction, or their significance. And this led me to embark on a master's degree at the University of Worcester in medieval archaeology. So as part of this, I recorded all of the church chests in the county of Herefordshire, where I live, and also neighbouring Worcestershire. So many weekends spent trudging around cold churches, as I say, every weekend and more besides. And I'm now furniture consultant for the Hereford Diocese and have expanded my research and recording for church chests into other counties such as Gloucestershire, Warwickshire and Shropshire. So here's a quick summary of what I'm going to talk to you about this evening. Firstly, I will explain the different types of chests that we find extant in churches today and their methods of construction. And then we will have a look at some examples of each type found in churches throughout Herefordshire and Worcestershire. Then I will discuss their uses and their significance during the medieval period and what they meant to people who used them and depended on them. Then we will explore the different methods of dating church chests, including dendrochronology or tree ring dating. I thought it also quite important to talk a little bit about their care and conservation for any of you who may be custodian of a church chest. And finally, I'm going to conclude by sharing some tales from my adventures chest hunting. So all the examples of chests that I'm going to show you this evening have been recorded in Herefordshire and Worcestershire, where my research was based for my degree. But for those of you who are not sure where those counties are, here's a map showing that Herefordshire sits on the border of Wales and Worcestershire is just to the east of Herefordshire. So there are four main types of church chest, though mixed types can also occur. The dugout chest has been pulled at St Mary's Church, Foy, in Herefordshire. Now, the main benefit of this type of chest over other types is their great weight, which made them very difficult to steal. Quite often they were banded by iron straps, making them also very difficult to prise open. Now, because they were usually made from green or unseasoned timber, they often split as they dried out. So iron straps were usually added to restrict this movement. They have a single or double cavity hewn out from a tree trunk using an axe and adze. And sometimes the cavity is quite small in comparison to the overall chest size. So most dugout chests are between 1 and 2.5 meters long. So they had to have been made from fairly large trees. Antiquarians and scholars in the 19th and early 20th century denoted dugouts to the earliest phase of chest development, given their simple and crude design, believing that once the tools and techniques were developed to make other forms of chest, they were no longer made. However, my research provides evidence that dugout chests were made throughout the medieval period, and they continued to be made long after the Reformation, well into the 17th century. So an interesting example of a dugout chest can be found in the church at Rock in Worcestershire, which is believed to be 13th century. It's made of oak. It's 1940 millimeters long by 400 millimeters wide and tall. It has a single lid opening to a small cavity, 3 keyholes in the lid for 3 plate locks, plus 2 stapled hasps on the front for the provision of padlocks. So you can see those here. One of these is actually a, you can see that there are hundreds of nails in the front and the lid, rows of nails spanning out to the ends of the chest. And apart from the decoration, these would have made it harder for anyone trying to saw the chest to gain access at ends. The slot in the lid was for the collection of alms associated with St. Peter's pence, which did in the church's name, St. Peter's. This is one of my favourite chests in Herefordshire, as I find it so enigmatic. It's made of elm and it's reputed to be 14th century or earlier. I believe it's 14th century. And I go into a bit more detail in the paper that's coming out in December for the Church Archaeology. So it's a little clue to the dating in the ironwork. The chest is 2,590 millimetres long. That's over 8 feet. So it's one of the largest chests in the county. And it has 2 domed lids opening to 2 substantial cavities. You can see crossing bands of iron all over the lids and the front there, and lots of nails studded in between again. There are further crossing straps and nails on the lids, but the lid has crosses, you can just see here, between the straps. This one's lost its cross piece there. And there's also a very large key escutcheon, which is shown in the detailed picture. What a very large key it would have been. So the second type of church chest is the boarded chest, which is made from 5 planks nailed together and a 6th plank hinged for a lid. Sometimes the lid was divided into 2. Sometimes that was done later than when it was made. So this type of chest construction was lighter and easier to move than the dugout chests, even with the addition of iron straps. But dating evidence shows boarded chests coexisted with dugouts from the 12th right through to the 17th century. So this example is in the church at St Mary the Virgin in Bishop's Froom, Herefordshire. And it was originally fastened with 3 locks and had 3 different keys. One for the bishop, one for the priest of the church, and one for a trusted layman. So they each had to be present for the chest to be opened. Now, if a church was too remote for the bishop to visit, sometimes the case, the keys were distributed between the priest, the church warden, and a trusted layman. The detail shows a concave-sided lock, and these was attributed to the period between 1300 and 1550, although styles did continue, particularly in rural areas, and were often replaced. So they can't really be taken as a reliable way of dating a chest. Boarded chests which have sides that extend to form legs, you can see here, sides carry down to form the legs, called hutch chests. Now the feet lift the chest off the floor so that the air can circulate and they're less likely to rot. A weakness with boarded chests is that they tended to split as the boards were generally wide and the nails restricted the movement. You can see this chest in St Peter's Church in Besford, Worcestershire, sorry. It also has 3 locks. The middle lock is likely a replacement, as you can see a brass escutcheon keyhole cover here and slightly darker steel to the other 2. And there's also the scar with holes of a previous lock. Now also note the saw marks on the front of this chest, quite visible at an angle. Now I talk quite a bit about saw marks in much more detail in the forthcoming paper, which is all about dugout chests. I go into how that you can use saw marks if they're visible to help in making date estimates, but we haven't got time to cover that tonight. So this elaborate chest sits in St James the Great Cradley in Herefordshire, and this was on my opening slide. It is made of oak and it has numerous split curl bifurcated balls on the straps. That's these beautiful curls here. Again, it has 2 lids opening to 2 cavities, and this chest has a total of 10 different locks on the front and in the lid. It took me quite a while to find them all, but they've all been added at different stages of the chest's life. Now, this chest has been stylistically dated by various scholars to the late 13th or mid 14th century, and it is one of the longest chests in the 2 counties, 1,745 millimetres, or just over 9 feet long. So the third main type of church chest, the clamp chest, where the front and back boards are clamped between 2 large uprights called stiles. Here they are, so you can see these wide boards are stiles, and then the central board is clamped between the 2. Now, these are the rarest type church chests, with only 3 found in Herefordshire and 3 in Worcestershire. These wide styles and the front panel are often decorated. So this 13th century example in the V&A has large chip-carved roundels. Roundels are said to be symbolic of the sun and originate in pagan symbolism, which was adopted by the Christian church during its conversion period. Clamp chests appear in the early 13th century, and they persist until around the early 15th century, with a few being made as late as the 17th century. There are, as I say, very few clamp chests in Herefordshire or Worcestershire, but this example is found in St Leonard's Church in Bretforton, Worcestershire. It has comparatively narrow styles to other clamp chests, and it's relatively plain apart from the interesting double split curl terminals on the strap hinges shown here in the detail. So also worthy of note are the pits-on marks on the front. You can see again the striations at almost 90 degrees to the front edge of the chest. Perhaps the best example of a clamp chest in 2 counties is the one at All Saints Church in Hereford. It's denoted to the 14th century by the Royal Commission for Herefordshire Monuments, England, Historic Monuments, sorry, and has a carved front with Gothic arcading and chip-carved roundels. It's quite impressive, isn't it? Interestingly, it has a single central lock plate, though again, the present one isn't the original. As you can see, just there's a key hole added in with a lock behind. So the 4th main type of chest that you'll find in churches is the framed and panelled, whereby loose unglued panels sit in frames made up of horizontal rails and vertical stiles. So these are the rails and these are the stiles, and they usually have feet to lift them off the floor. This type was developed in the 15th century, late 15th century, to overcome the problem of shrinkage cracks, as the unglued panels are able to move about in the frames, mortise and tenon together. Now, this construction enabled chests to be much lighter and larger, although it did mean that they were less secure. So there are more panel chests than any other type in churches, and many or most from the 16th century, like this one in Holy Trinity Church. But generally they appear after the Reformation in England. And they quite often have this decoration on the panels as well. So before iron safes were developed, the church chests were used to store church valuables, such as church plate, altar cloths and alms collected for the poor, or to fund crusades. Now, later chests were used to store church registers and important donated to the church, particularly after the Black Death in the 14th century. And these were given with funds to delineate the identities of their donors after death and to pray their souls. It would lessen their time in purgatory. So this is the only medieval vestment in North Waterford in Ireland, and it was hidden from Cromwell's men during the Reformation and was rediscovered in the 18th century. It only survived in such amazing condition because it was hidden in an iron-bound chest. That's incredible, isn't it? So, the injunctions of Archbishop Alfric, who died in 1005, tell us that dugout chests were among sacred items in churches long before the Norman conquest. So they were placed next to the altar, usually on the north side in the sacred chancel. So this confirms that church chests were themselves sacred artifacts in which sacred accoutrements were placed for safekeeping. After the Norman conquest, various edicts were issued for chests to be constructed by the king or the pope. So for an example, in 1199, a papal order was made by Pope Innocent III, which called for hollow trunks to be placed in every parish church so that, I quote, the faithful should be exhorted to deposit in it, i.e. a hollow trunk, according as God moved their hearts, their alms for the remission of their sins. And once a week in all churches, mass usually of those who should thus contribute. So that's a rather lovely insight, isn't it, into the importance of the church chest. So these trunks were to be fastened with 3 locks and 3 keys, though a chest with 3 locks, I have to say, does not necessarily mean that it was made to comply with an edict. Sometimes that tradition continued, shall we say. So when ascribing stylistic dates, it is important to bear in mind that early chests were adapted to comply with later edicts, and traditions of designs continued throughout the medieval period. So some are actually secular chests that have been donated to the church and adapted. Now, during the Reformation, many church chests and their contents were sadly sold or confiscated for the king, or even worse, burnt. Some were hidden, and in some rural churches, they were missed by Cromwell's men. But nevertheless, after the Reformation, they lost their importance along with their significance. Many chests have been demoted to the rear of the overlooked. So at different points in medieval society, particular individuals may have felt ownership towards a chest. And as a chest was transferred to the care of one church warden to another, they exchanged ownership. And in some cases, this sense of ownership may have inspired them to inscribe their initials on the chest, as seen on this one at Spetchley, Worcestershire. 1280 millimeters. On the front of the chest, you can just make out the letters in the detail here. I think they say T, or it could be a cross, O-H, V-E, Wale, W-A-L-L-E, and the date 1626. If anyone has any ideas about what this says or means, you can let me know at the end. But we think that this is the church warden at the time. Now, sometimes a chest is mistakenly dated by its inscription. But this was common practice for church wardens to apply their initials around the 17th century onto chests of much older dates. So this particular chest is stylistically dated to the 14th century, but as you can see, it wasn't until the 17th century that a church warden made it their own. It can be said that a transfer occurs from a personality's identity to an object, and that as people merge with things, they develop personalities. So therefore, you could say that a chest gains personality through the various interactions and associations with individuals and the various transformations which take place throughout its life course. And it can be said that this process of change forms the chest's cultural biography. So this diagram illustrates the entanglement of dependencies between the church chest and the various people represent the people who had a relationship with the church chest, and the green circles represent the raw materials which were used to make the chest, i.e. the trees of oak and of elm. So that's them here. Most chests are made from oak and elm, although some are made of deal or pine, later ones particularly. So each arrow shows the effect of an individual on the chest and the reciprocal effect of the chest on each individual, physical and spiritual, creating an ebb and flow of entanglement and interconnections between people and church chest. So from the king to the bishop, from the church warden to the layman, from the carpenter to the blacksmith, people formed dependencies on the church chest in the medieval period. And so too, it can be said that the church chest depended on the people who interacted with it. So the most dominant people, the king, the pope, the cardinal, and the bishop, relied upon each other to keep safe a key and carry out their orders for a chest to be constructed, who in turn relied upon the carpenter to fell and fashion the tree into a chest. And the carpenter relied on the blacksmith to make the ironwork to complete the chest and make it secure. So thus we see many layers of interaction around this single artifact. So how do we perceive the church chest in the 21st century? Well, sadly, many present-day churches' chests have been moved from their esteemed position adjacent to the sacred altar and are now demoted to the rear of the church, as I said previously. So the relationship between humans and church chests may have altered along with their meaning and their importance, but this is not to suggest that this current state is fixed, because there has been a recent resurgence in church furniture, fittings, particularly in the secular market and for private and museum collections. My research really seeks to raise awareness of the significance of church chests as important archaeological artifacts, which can connect us to people in the past, particularly as so many of them are filled with Christmas decorations or flower arranging materials. In medieval England, the congregation would have been illiterate, painted on the walls of the church, been both had a powerful impact and in awe and in penance and hell. Chest was the key to receiving forgiveness for sins, and the key to gaining entry into the kingdom of heaven is to understand the power that the church chest must have held over parishioners in medieval England. For many people throughout the medieval period, the church chest would have been an object to revere. For others, it would have been an object to fear. So this heavily banded dugout chest at Lee in Herefordshire, which is also one of my favourites, appears a formidable object with its wide iron straps and its large nail heads. This is dated to either the late 12th or early 13th century. The money slot cut into the straps directs coins into a locked tube. You can just see it here, and there's a close-up picture of it. So we know that the church chest would have had a powerful role to play in medieval society. Various kings, popes, and craftsmen would have affected the church chest from its design through to its construction. And in turn, the chest would have affected the lives of people in various different ways. So throughout its lifetime, the church chest would have undergone physical transformations in its construction from tree to artifact. For example, it may have been constructed in response to an edict to collect alms, and therefore a money slot was made in its lid, and it was placed next to the altar in the most sacrosanct part of the church. But when a subsequent edict forbade the collection of alms and ordered that it provide storage for books and vestments instead, the money slot was covered up and a petition inserted into the cavity to provide separate sections for books and vestments. So here we can see that church chests were instruments of the Christian church's power. An example of a church chest whose construction, meaning and use have changed over the years can be seen at this one in Kingston in Herefordshire. It's very impressive, made of oak, and is 2,600 millimetres or 8'5" long, and again is one of the largest dugout chests in Herefordshire. So each lid has a wide double-ended fleur-de-lis, which is unusual. It's the only chest I've seen with this feature on it. And they have split curl terminals, which we've seen before. which have been ascribed to the earliest phase of ironwork by various scholars, although again that style can be copied later on. There are also 2 strap hinges on each lid with split pearl terminals and 33 vertical straps along the front of this chest. That's quite something, and I wondered whether the 33 was symbolic. So it also has 2 slightly domed lids, which may have originally been one length. And I'll tell you why I think that in a moment. There is evidence for 6 locks in total, although these are likely added at different stages in the chest's life. Behind the left lock plate, this one here, you can see that there's been new timber inserted, indicating that this lock plate is a later addition. So when we look inside the chest, you can see that a crude partition has been made by inserting a block of wood. And this is a pointer to the fact that the chest was likely divided in 2 to conform to a change in use. The central hasp is decorated with a stamped pattern, you can see here, and it corresponds to the staple on the front of the chest. So that would have been used to put a padlock on. I've seen similar stamp patterns on a church door at Foy and another dugout chest in Lee in Herefordshire, which we saw previously. So they may have been made by the same blacksmith, and the pattern may be symbolic. Also note that some of the vertical straps on the front of the chest, can we see clearer in this picture, are made of smoother metal, and the nails heads are different. So these are also likely later additions or replacements cut out from sheet steel, whereas the original straps display the hammer marks of the forge. You can see on this one, the texture is quite different from the smooth sheet steel there. And they're punched for the provision of nails while still hot in the forge. So they create this bulge around each nail head rather than them being cut out. So dendrochronology has been carried out on this chest as part of my research, and it returned a felling and conversion date between 1243 and 1273, which is actually consistent with the stylistic dates and the comparative ironwork, which is nice. And so it's important to take into account the evolution of a chest throughout its lifetime, because straps, hinges, and locks can be replaced and added, and lids get cut into to conform to changes in use. So another dugout chest, which connects us to the people for whom it was made, is found at Alderton in Herefordshire. This one's made of oak, and it's 1910 millimeters, or just over 6 feet long. It's quite large in overall though. These hinges, 3 hinges secure the lid, you can see here. And each one has a split curl or bifurcated terminal. And there are 3 vertical straps on the front as well with similar terminals, though these have had an additional heraldic fleur-de-lis inserted between each terminal, which you can see here in the picture detail. And you can tell they've been inserted later because the iron here sits below, it's been inserted behind the original split curl. So the chest opens to reveal one large cavity, and you can see the adze and axe marks visible underneath the lid. You can also see the scar of a former lock plate and a large keyhole underneath the lid. And this may have been a stock lock where the mechanism was set in a block of wood and would have had a sliding bolt which located in the staple at the front of the chest. There are also 2 staples for padlocks on the front, you can see here. So previous scholars have dated this chest to the 13th century, but with later heraldic terminals. However, the results of dendrochronology returned a likely felling and conversion date between 1347 and 1377, placing its construction well into the 14th century. Interestingly, this dendro date range is just after the death of Adam of Alderton, who died in 1345. Now he went from being Bishop of Hereford to the Bishop of Worcester, and then he finally became the Bishop of Winchester. So perhaps this chest was made to commemorate his death. The Church of St. George's is also associated with the notorious medieval family, the Mortimers. So if the chest is original to St. George's, it's possible that it was commissioned under Mortimer patronage, with the heraldic fleur-de-lis added later. So for some chests, I produce a lined pen drawing as it reveals details of the chest that might be overlooked in a photograph. And the process of drawing leads me to observe and understand the chest in a slightly different way, similar to when you're producing a map or a diagram. And you can include details like the grain on the end of the chest and things like that, which stand out more, I think, in drawings. So without dendrochronology or tree ring dating, date estimates for chests have been made by previous scholars based on stylistic characteristics, like the way a chest is constructed, the size of the cavity, or the style of ironwork. But this can be unreliable, given that styles can remain in traditional use long after fashions have changed. It is difficult to know whether ironwork is original or a similar style copied by later craftsmen making repairs or altering the chest for a change of use. But dendrochronology provides us with a much more reliable method of dating, providing the requirements are met. So to stand a chance at a good match with existing growth ring chronologies, there needs to be at least 50 growth rings present, and the samples must be undamaged by timber faults or woodworm. But dugout chests are usually good candidates for dendrochronology, as they have accessible radial growth rings in their base, so spanning out from the heart. And in the picture here, you can see Dr. Andy Moyer of Tree Ring Services in the Forest of Dean extracting a core radially from the chest using an electric drill and a special bit. And he did, Dr. Moyer did all the chest testing in Herefordshire and Worcestershire. And 5 of them returned dates, which is great. So after a core is taken, the hole is plugged and stained to match in. So although this method is intrusive, it is barely visible afterwards. And we use a little bit of the oak dust that came out to match it in, so you can really hardly see it. The core is then glued to a piece of timber and taken back to the laboratory, where it's sanded, and the gaps between the growth rings are carefully measured. These are then matched to existing chronologies of growth rings to provide date estimates for the felling and conversion of the tree. So prior to my research, only 6 dugout church chests have been dated by dendrochronology in Britain. So we've been able to contribute a further 6 dates for dugouts over the past 4 years, which is amazing. Another dugout chest was dated by dendrochronology at St. John the Baptist Church in Feckenham. And it's the second longest in the county at 7'7" long, and has 2 lids which overlap in the middle. This is a feature I haven't seen anywhere else. You can see in the detailed picture how you have to open the left lid before you can open the right. On the front of the chest, there are 4 lock plates, and these have hasps which are hinged from straps that go through the front of the lid, which again is quite unusual. And if you look closely at the 3 on the right, again, you can see new timber has been inserted behind the lock plates, indicating that those lock plates are more recent than the base. The other little clue, which I believe is on the next picture, yep, is the date which has been stamped into the lock plate. It says 1827. So we can conclude that each lock plate was added in the 19th century. So dendrochronology, as part of the research, returned a date between 1435 and 1465 for the felling and conversion of the base. However, the lid could not be dated, but it is likely to have been replaced in the 19th century when restoration was carried out on the chest. So this brings me to talk about a little bit about their care and conservation. If you are a guardian of a church chest and you want to understand what you can do to maintain it, I'll outline a few things that you can do that will really make a difference to its conservation. Probably the most important thing is to raise the chest up on wooden bearers or feet. This will prevent damp from channeling from the floor to the chest and allow airflow underneath the chest. Debris and dust which builds up on the top of the chest and inside can be removed with a soft brush and a very gentle hoover, although don't actually hoover the chest directly or you might end up sucking up bits of timber and they'll be lost. So avoid using any furniture sprays or waxes. A lot of them contain silicone. A microcrystalline wax can be applied to already polished surfaces and ironwork, as it won't alter the colour, but otherwise just leave them be. Siting the chest away from damp stone walls and direct sources of heat, which can cause the timber to experience frequent changes of temperature, is not a good idea, as this can lead to shrinkage, cracks and splits. So don't put them in front of radiators. Maintaining a dehumidifier nearby can be a very good idea. I know the church can be a large space and they might not make much difference, but keeping that moisture content below 60% will considerably reduce the likelihood of attack by furniture beetles or even death watch beetles. So any parts or bits of wood which fall off the chest need to be labelled and stored. Obviously, don't attempt to stick them back on with filler. I'm going to show you a chest that has had that fate happen to it in a minute. It's important to give any pieces that break off to a specialist blacksmith or furniture restorer to make sympathetic repairs. And finally, if there are signs of live furniture attack, beetle attack, then these can be indicated by fresh wormholes and little piles of dust beneath the chest called frass. Then the chest is likely to require timber treatment. You usually have to apply for a faculty from the archdeacon to carry out any invasive work. So this is best undertaken by a specialist restorer or conservator. So I thought we'd finish with a few interesting tales from my adventures chest hunting. There have been many, but I'm going to narrow it down to just a few. So it took me over a year to complete a visit of all the churches in Herefordshire and Worcestershire which might contain chests, and some of them were harder to access than I imagined. So 4 years later, I'm still seeking out church chests to record, and I'm building a database of dugouts in Britain. So my research told me that there was a chest hidden away in the belfry of Foy Church in Herefordshire, so I went to investigate. The church warden unlocked the tiny door to the belfry, and I, along with my assistant and a bag of heavy camera equipment, had to climb a very narrow spiral staircase to reach the chest. So we were both clinging onto the rope, which you can see there in the centre of this picture. Doesn't look particularly solid, should we say, when the church warden shouted back, "Don't hold onto the rope, it might give way." So that was a bit dicey. And at the top of the spiral staircase, we found a very battered old chest in a very sad condition, hewn from an elm tree and believed to have been made in the 13th century. But being open to the winds and the rain, it has unfortunately weathered greatly. Anyway, there was no way that this chest had could have been carried up the spiral staircase, so it had to have been hoisted into the belfry, and then the floor must have been fitted beneath it before it was lowered onto the floorboards. And there it will probably stay, unfortunately seen by very few, except you and I, of course. So on another occasion, one very wet and windy day, I followed instructions to Silo Church on the Friends of the Friendless Churches website. It lies on the edge of the Herefordshire Welsh border, along a track into a field, through two field gates, two fields with gates, and then we had to open and close them as we drove through, obviously. Then we stopped at a railway crossing, and we had to telephone the signal man to ask permission to drive across the railway track. So he told us it was safe to do so, but once we got over the track, we then had to phone to say that we'd safely got to the other side. And then I continued to drive precariously over a single track, which had virtually worn away to leave barely enough width for the car to pass over, with a steep slope off to one side. And I eventually reached a slightly spooky looking farm and was directed to the church over the field yonder. So we found the church across the field. Remember, we're lugging lots of heavy camera equipment and things, and probably didn't wear appropriate footwear. No, we did. Next to the remains of a castle motte, which apparently may once have been occupied by a tenant of the de Lacy's. So a notice in the porch instructed us to leave the metal gate across the entrance to the church in order to prevent sheep wandering into the church. So inside the chancel, there sat this very modest dugout chest with a single lid and cavity. Unusually, it has two holes here on the lid, which we can only guess or speculate as to their use. Anyway, once the chest was carefully recorded, we had to repeat the whole process in reverse, but it is worth it. It's worth going to find that one. Another day out chest hunting, and I found this dugout chest in Holy Trinity Church, Eckington in Worcestershire. It is the smallest dugout chest in the two counties, at only 870 millimetres, or just under 3 feet long. It's made from elm wood, and it's reputed to be 13th century, having a very small cavity, perhaps for the safekeeping of a Bible. Unfortunately, it has been very eroded by woodworm, and the loop halves on the front have been secured with wood filler. I don't know where these red lines have suddenly come from either, but what we're looking at here is the filler that they've used to stick back in the ironwork, which was rather barbaric, unfortunately, and completely unsympathetic. There is a story told by a local historian that during the Reformation, the chest was hidden from Cromwell's men by being sunk into a local stream to protect its contents, which suggests that it was used to store coins rather than a Bible or a book. So long after it was fished out and reinstated in the church in 1622, the administrators of Eckington Church were found guilty of misappropriating funds, and the church wardens took custody of the trust deeds and locked them in, I quote, a special chest, like this one, until 1821, when parish documents were moved to the Worcestershire Records Office. So that brings me to the end of my talk today. I hope you've enjoyed hearing about all about church chests in the medieval period. If I've whet your appetite for church chests and you'd like to learn more, you can join my Facebook group, Church Chest Hunters UK, where you can also post your own pictures of church chests that you find around England or Britain. And you can also get involved in recording any chests you find in churches and contribute towards a nationwide database that I'm building. If you would like a copy of my recording sheets, do get in touch with me via Facebook or send me an email at rachel@sycamorerestoration.co.uk. You can also find all the dendro-dated chests excuse me, on the Building Archaeology Research Database. And as I've said, I have a paper about to come out in the next edition of Church Archaeology, and this is specifically about dugout church chests. So here are some of the references mentioned in my talk, and that's it. Thank you very, very much for tuning in and listening today.
Well, excuse me. Thank you very much, Rachel. That was absolutely fascinating. And the internet held out. So that was
Hooray.
brilliant.
I don't know what those
So-
red lines were that suddenly appeared, but there we are.
Well, we can live with red lines. We'll just not cross them. Brilliant. Well, there were lots of things you raised there, and I'm very glad you got a paper on the dugout chests coming out, because they particularly piqued my interest, I have to say. And I kind of wondered with the dugout chests. That's just something that occurred to me is, do you think? Because on one hand, they're very crude, and I understand they're very secure and whatever, and they're probably quite tricky to make, because you've got to sort of scoop out.
Much
But the fact
trickier
that
than people think, yes.
Absolutely, and some of them just kind of look like tree trunks. And do you
Yes.
think there's potentially any symbolism in that stuff?
Oh, yes.
Okay. She didn't plant that question with me, by the
No,
way.
I absolutely do. That's really interesting that you've raised that. I do have some theories, and some people may think I'm barking up the wrong tree, but I do have some theories as to how symbolic they were. I believe that it was all part of the Christianizing of the paganisms and the pagans, and incorporating all of that into the early church. I do, and I do go into some of this, particularly in the thesis I wrote. So I don't touch too much on that in the paper, but there is a whole area there to be researched, and I am thinking about doing a PhD to do it. Yeah, it's really important.
No, excellent. I mean, the similarities with early medieval coffins leapt to my mind, where hollowed out logs, and all fact goes right back to the Bronze Age, the early Bronze Age with hollowed out logs. So I mean, I thought that was kind of interesting. Anyway, enough of me. Rob, I'm sure we've got some questions.
Yeah, we have lots of comments as well. People discussing lots of things that were mentioned in your talk, Rachel. One question here from John says, do any of those types of chests have false bottoms or secret compartments, or any sort of sliding hidden elements?
Unfortunately, I haven't come across any in Herefordshire or Worcestershire yet, or any of the other counties where I started studying. But I'm hoping to find a false bottom or a secret compartment. I've certainly read about them. Someone's just mentioned there the late Christopher Pickford, the Professor Christopher Pickford, who was a great friend and mentor to me whilst I was undertaking my research, and he certainly came across some secret compartments. So yes, they are there. So but I've yet to find one.
I'm sure you will. I hope you do. That would be really great. Another question is, have you ever come across chests that have protection marks on them?
Yes, there are quite a few actually. The most common one are daisy wheels or sun symbols subscribed, scratched into the surfaces. I recently conserved a chest at Munsley in Herefordshire, and they weren't visible until I cleaned the chest, and then I came across them and I was delighted. There was a small one on the front and there was a large one on the lid. And so yes, I do believe they're apotropaic marks. I've come across things like there was a palm leaf scribed onto the lid of one at Madley. What else have I come across? Scratches, lots of scratches in different directions, and there are papers I know about this sort of thing and what they might mean. WM is another common one, which is supposedly the symbol for the Virgin Mary. Yeah,
really interesting. A few more questions coming in now. Do you have plans to extend your research into any other nearby areas?
As many as I can. I've just I'm currently fitting out my van as a day van, just so that I can go and stay overnight and go a bit further, because obviously at the moment I've got to plan for visits that I can do, there and back. But as I span out, I'm hooked. I want to cover Warwickshire, Shropshire. They're not too far from me. I know there's somebody doing an inventory down in Essex at the moment. So yeah, they are starting to happen, and I want to carry on for the rest of my life now. This is it. This is my thing.
Yeah, fantastic. I suppose I had a question as well. I was in York Minster yesterday, and I was looking at the cope chests in there. Those two
Yeah.
great big ones that look like the shapes of Trivial Pursuit cake slices or something like
Yes,
that.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, are they? What were the cathedral chests? How were they different?
Yeah, I haven't included those in my study just because they tended, there are very few of them. They tended to be made specifically for those cope chests, for those copes, sorry, and so that they could be laid out without being creased. I know there's one in Gloucester, not far from here. And they display some quite technical carpentry skills, actually. Yes, so they're another category of chests, the cope ones.
Yeah, I think we've got one final question here that we've got time for, and this is are the size of the chests in parish churches related to the size of the parish?
Good question. I'd say generally, yes, if it's a wealthy parish, then they would have made a substantial chest for a substantial amount of church accoutrement. So they would have had a very valuable investment. They would have had a lot of church plate, particularly if the bishop was visiting. And so some of the ones we've seen are from wealthy parishes. That one at Kingstone I showed you with all the ironwork, that's a wealthy parish. And that's something I've started looking at, because you can access the tax records for parishes. And there is a correlation between the size of the chests and the Welsh of the parish in the medieval period. So yes, definitely. Very good question.
Yeah, I think we've got time for one more.
Excellent.
Anne has just put this in the chat box. Do you think that chests in the West, in the areas you're looking at, are similar to those in East Anglia? Thinking about David Sherlock's book on Suffolk chests.
There are very little similarities, actually. I've seen similarities in ironwork, but not in chest styles. They differ considerably, and that's why it's so interesting to do these county studies, to build a picture of the sort of regional variations. So there tend to be more clamped chests down south, domed chests. We don't have many of those in the West. And we do have, in the 17th century examples of the panel chests, quite a lot of particular carving, like upside down hearts carved into panels and things like that, which are associated with the West Country. So yeah, there are definitely regional trends, and they do differ from other areas. So that's why I want to record as many as possible and get as many people on board recording, so that we can build a true picture of what's out there around Britain.
Yeah, it's a great project. And thank you all for your questions. And I'll hand back to
thank you. Thank you for everybody that attended and listened. And yeah, it'd be nice to hear from anyone.
Really well. Yes, I'll add my thanks to Rob's there. Thank you very much, Rachel. That's fascinating. And of course, you can read all about aspects of her work in the next volume of Church Archaeology, which I believe is either gone or about to go to the printers. So so it'll be landing on members' doorsteps soon. So if you're not a member, I don't know of a bigger incentive than to join now. So it just remains for me to let you know about our next talk in 2023. I know it sounds miles away, but it isn't. On the 9th of January, we have Morgan Ellis-Lee giving us a talk on medieval English cadaver monuments. So that's another fascinating material related talk. So thank you again to our speaker. Thank you all for attending, and I hope we can see as many of you as possible again in the new year. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.